How often do we encounter tales where victims return to the realm of the living after their own demise to seek vengeance on their wrongdoer? You might say this only happens in movies, and you'd be right. Yet, real life sometimes offers narratives far more intriguing than cinema. Such stories inspire filmmakers to go to great lengths to create movies based on actual events. Today, you'll hear precisely this type of account. After all, Judy essentially rose from the grave to punish her tormentor and aid other women. When Bonnie and Daniel entered the room, they felt as if they might faint at any moment. On the bed lay a bandaged figure, its skin almost entirely gone. One hand lacked fingers, and the ears were missing. At first glance, they thought the nurse had made a mistake. According to the doctors, Judy had only hours to live, as such severe injuries essentially guaranteed a fatal outcome. Today's account will showcase one of the most incredible displays of human resilience ever encountered. This woman's life was a series of ordeals, one of which ended quite tragically. However, while teetering between life and death, Judy Malinowski managed to alter the justice system in her state. Judy was born on August 26, 1983, in Columbus, Ohio. She spent her childhood there with her brother Patrick and sister Danielle. Before Judy's birth, her mother had experienced several unsuccessful pregnancies, so the baby's arrival was a long-awaited miracle for her parents. As the eldest child, Judy took on the responsibility of looking after her younger siblings. The girl adored Danielle and Patrick. The three weren't just siblings, they were the closest of friends. Judy also shared a special bond with her mother, who treated her eldest daughter like a confidant. During her school years, Judy excelled in everything, performed well academically, made numerous friends, and was one of the most popular girls in her class. Her vivacity and charisma didn't go unnoticed. The high schooler won several beauty pageants, including being crowned Miss New Albany. At prom, she was named Queen of the Ball. After graduating high school, Judy continued her education at Ohio State University. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. The young woman shared her life plans with her mother. She desired a simple life, quiet and peaceful, to find a job after university and settle down in a cute little house with a loving husband and children. The college student spent most of her free time not at youth parties, but volunteering at nursing homes. She wanted her career to follow a path of helping others, but soon she herself would need assistance. Her idyllic world was plunged into chaos. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. A major tragedy struck Judy's life when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. For the first month, it seemed her life was over, and she was destined to die young. The young woman faced a serious battle for her own health and the beautiful future she had dreamed of. This period was filled with regrets, tears, and complaints about fate, but ultimately, the difficult fight was won. Remarkably, Judy managed to defeat cancer. Overcoming this terrible illness profoundly impacted the student's character. She realized she had accomplished something most couldn't. Now she felt obligated to be happy and live the rest of her life as she had dreamed in childhood, in love and harmony. When Judy turned 21, she met a man named Ron. The young couple immediately fell for each other and soon married. They had two beautiful daughters, Kaylin and Madison. Judy thanked God for her happiness. The illness hadn't affected her ability to have children. Both girls were healthy, and the young woman's childhood dreams were slowly coming true. Unfortunately, it seemed someone above decided Judy hadn't experienced enough hardship yet. While pregnant with her second daughter, Madison, she discovered her husband Ron was having an affair. This news completely devastated her. By the time Madison was born, the relationship with her husband had completely fallen apart. The couple divorced, and around the same time, Judy experienced a relapse. The cancer returned with doubled intensity. At that point, only one solution seemed possible: a total hysterectomy, a gynecological surgery to remove the uterus. The young woman, having just turned 25, was crushed with grief. She couldn't understand why life was so unfair to her. She had already beaten the disease once and won. Why did she have to go through this again? To rid herself of cancer, Judy agreed to the operation, which was quite successful. It seemed she could celebrate victory a second time. However, the hysterectomy left her alone with such severe pain that only prescription painkillers provided relief. The country was experiencing an opioid crisis at the time. Strong medications were prescribed in excessive doses. This led many people to become dependent on prescription drugs. Judy unfortunately became one of them. After the surgery, the pain wouldn't subside, and if she stopped taking the pills, it became unbearable. Constant use of strong painkillers led to habituation, and the drugs stopped working. Either an increased dose or an even stronger medication was required. Judy had been on pills for so long that her medical insurance stopped covering the treatment costs. This meant she could no longer afford prescription medications, so she turned to illegal substances. She essentially became dependent on drugs that provided even slight pain relief. It got to the point where Judy's life completely fell apart. The pills cost a fortune, and relationships with family and friends became increasingly strained. Addiction to controlled substances also made it difficult for Judy to care for her daughters. Fortunately, her family intervened. Her older daughter, Kaylin, was taken in by grandmother Bonnie, while Madison was cared for by her Aunt Danielle, Judy's sister. Although relations with relatives were sometimes tense due to the young woman's harmful addiction, they never abandoned Judy, not wanting her to face these trials alone. The family did everything possible to help her during this difficult time. Eventually, Judy realized her harmful dependency was part of her impulsive choices, affecting not only her, but also her children. This realization brought Judy to her senses. A rehabilitation course followed to cleanse herself and steer her life in the right direction. It was tough, but Judy Malinowski had handled even more challenging tasks. She simply viewed it as another battle for her own future. Once again, the woman triumphed over circumstances. She showed such determination that after rehab, her life changed dramatically. Over time, Judy returned to her former happy and cheerful state. The addiction was now under complete control. She managed to pull herself together again, find an apartment, a job, and reunite with her daughters. She continued attending meetings for people struggling with harmful habits, but already felt strong enough to finally return to a normal existence. Now Judy had the quiet, peaceful, happy life she had always dreamed of. This lasted for several years before everything collapsed again, as Judy's trials were not over. It all started with a man named Michael Slager. At 31, Judy met a man who contacted her on social media. They had actually crossed paths earlier at an acquaintance's place when she was still married, but she hadn't paid him much attention. In 2014, Michael turned 40. He happened to see Judy's photo online and began trying to catch her attention, commenting on all her posts, liking photos, and sending private messages. A sort of online friendship developed between them. After some time, Michael confessed his feelings. The man claimed he had liked Judy from the first glance, but she was married then, so he didn't dare approach her. He tried to forget their encounter but accidentally stumbled upon her photo on social media. He visited her page and learned her heart was free. Michael showered Judy with compliments, saying exactly what she wanted to hear. He was considerate, attentive, affectionate, promising to give her tranquility, peace, and love. Essentially, he used all his charm to win her heart. April 2015 arrived just a few months after they started communicating on social media, when Judy changed her status to indicate she was in a relationship with Michael Slager. Michael's charm had worked, and from this moment, everything went downhill, because Judy didn't know one thing. Her new chosen one had an extensive criminal history. When Michael met Judy, He had already been convicted of theft, violence, illegal weapon possession, assault, sexual coercion, threats, false police reporting, resisting arrest, hooliganism, and so on. The list of his convictions was lengthy. It immediately became clear that the law meant nothing to him. Michael was a professional criminal, but somehow he managed to hide this from his new girlfriend. Although Judy's mom, Bonnie, sensed something was off about this guy from their first meeting, the woman couldn't even explain to herself why she disliked him. However, Michael used manipulation, telling Judy's mom that she shouldn't judge him for his tattoos or certain character traits because even Jesus forgave people their sins. And the woman backed off, deciding that her daughter would figure out her own relationship. Very soon, Michael moved into Judy's apartment and immediately acted like he owned the place. This happened just weeks after Judy changed her relationship status on social media. His possessive traits regarding his girlfriend began to show in every detail. The man wanted to control every aspect of Judy's life, who no longer had a say. For instance, Judy wasn't allowed to leave her apartment without Michael's permission. She could only go outside with him. Michael installed a tracking device on his girlfriend's phone, followed by physical abuse and insults. There was another thing Michael did to completely suppress and destroy Judy's will. He learned that until recently, her life had been hell as she battled a harmful addiction. Although Judy had nearly overcome it by then, Michael decided he could use his girlfriend's weaknesses to his advantage. He wanted Judy to be weak, vulnerable, and entirely dependent on him. To bring his plan to life, Michael bought a batch of illegal substances, actively encouraging the woman to relapse. If Judy became addicted to drugs again, she'd be completely under his control. Michael could use this against her at any time. He didn't use anything himself, wasn't a dealer, just bought pills on the street, spending his own money. No matter how strong Judy's character was, they say addiction haunts a person their whole life, and it takes maximum effort not to relapse. Over the next few weeks, Michael continued to rock the boat through manipulation, insults, and guilt-tripping. One day, Judy relapsed. She got hooked on white powder again, and her life spiraled downward. Meanwhile, Michael turned the woman's family against her, calling her mother to complain that Judy was high again, that she was out of control and using more every day, that she was wasting their money and only cared about her next fix. Bonnie believed her daughter's boyfriend and pitied him, thinking he was just a hostage to the situation. Michael seemed almost saintly to her, agreeing to bear this heavy burden of responsibility for her troubled daughter. The woman even gave him some money to pay bills, buy food, and so on, but Michael spent it on buying the next dose for Judy. It seemed as if this person had appeared out of nowhere, and only to destroy Judy's already complicated life. One day, Michael called Bonnie and said her daughter had taken so much of the drug that she lost consciousness. The woman panicked and called emergency services, reporting an overdose. The arriving medics found Judy perfectly fine. Michael convinced them there had been an overdose, but his girlfriend had already come to. This was done to create a record in Judy's medical file about an emergency call due to a suspected overdose. Michael did everything to make others believe the problem he faced was Judy. He portrayed her as completely degraded for a fix. He used this to justify physical abuse and violence. Michael started beating Judy for the slightest transgression. Her body was covered in bruises, and once he nearly strangled her. Judy was so frightened that she turned to the authorities and reported domestic violence. She wanted to press charges against Michael, but thanks to his manipulations, law enforcement simply didn't believe Judy. Before them was a woman with a harmful addiction accusing a sober man who was caring for her. That's how it appeared to the police. They didn't take her seriously, thinking she had just made it all up, and that Michael was a good person trying to help Judy overcome her addiction. That's why Michael had been setting up situations from the beginning, so that later people would think Judy had gone crazy and couldn't be trusted. His devious plan was working. The abuse continued until Judy convinced her mom to help evict Michael from the apartment. But all of Bonnie's attempts also failed because Michael had no intention of leaving, and it was useless to expect help from the authorities. At that point, Judy had no choice but to flee herself. She stayed overnight at her mother's and friends' places, rented motel rooms, and tried to stay away from Michael. She was completely powerless against him. However, every time Judy ran away from the apartment, Michael called the police and reported her missing. The police would find the woman and bring her back. Once Judy took Michael's car to get further away from him, but he immediately reported it stolen, and the woman received a warning from the authorities. Each time she returned home, the man made it clear that the police were on his side, and Judy could do nothing about it. He warned that someday he'd get tired of tolerating her antics. If Judy decided to leave him, he'd simply take her life. No threats could intimidate Judy, as living with Michael was worse than death for her, so she wasn't about to give up the fight. Her final desperate plan was to enter a rehab facility, get clean, and put her life back on track. This was a safe haven where Michael wouldn't be able to reach her. She would stop depending on him, as the man was supplying her with drugs. Now she could break free from her harmful habit and start anew. Unfortunately, Judy wouldn't even make it to the rehabilitation center. Since Michael would carry out one of his most brutal threats, it would forever alter the life of the woman and her entire family. On August 2nd, 2015, 4 months into their relationship, Judy prepared to execute her plan to check into a clinic. At that time, her 2 daughters were living with their grandmother, so the girls were safe. Judy informed Michael of her decision because otherwise he simply wouldn't allow her to leave the apartment. Surprisingly, the man agreed and even offered to drive her to the hospital himself. So, Judy and Michael set off for the Parkside Rehab Center, located near Columbus, Ohio. However, on the way, the woman asked for some time to mentally prepare. She persuaded Michael to take her to her mother's so she could say goodbye to her daughters before parting. Michael turned the car around and they headed to a gas station to buy some drinks. Along the way, a heated argument broke out between them, which continued at the filling station. Judy was fed up. She wanted to be alone for at least a couple of minutes, so she got out of the car and walked across the parking lot. Michael started the truck and drove after her. All their movements were recorded by surveillance cameras. Catching up to Judy, the man demanded that she return to the vehicle. They started arguing again. When the situation finally escalated, Judy splashed her boyfriend in the face with the soda cup she was holding. And this incident provoked such a fit of rage in Michael that he returned to his car, pulled out a gas can, and then, unhurriedly, poured its contents on Judy. He doused her from head to toe, saying it was payback for her stunt. The woman felt the gasoline getting into her eyes, ears, nose, and throat. Judy began to choke. She couldn't see anything and was completely disoriented. Stumbling, the girl fell onto the asphalt and begged Michael to stop, but a cold, dead look was frozen in his eyes. He didn't care what Judy was saying at that moment or how she felt. The only thing he wanted to do was cause her as much pain and suffering as possible. Then the man returned to the car, took a lighter, and brought it to Judy's face. Judy was terrified, she cried, pleading with Michael over and over not to do it. She promised to fulfill all his demands and never contradict him again, but he silently flicked the lighter and touched the flame to her clothes. The flames engulfed her fuel-soaked clothes in an instant. The woman began rolling on the ground to extinguish the fire. She resembled a red fireball. Every part of her body was ablaze. Judy felt as if thousands of searing needles had simultaneously pierced her skin. Meanwhile, Michael stood watching as his woman burned alive. His eyes at that moment were black, cold, and soulless. He observed, satisfied with what he had done. The most insane part was that all of this occurred in broad daylight under surveillance cameras. Presumably, Michael thought he was above the law and could do whatever he pleased. There were people right there in the parking lot. They rushed to Judy to help put out the flames. One guy ran up and started yelling at Michael to do something instead of standing there like a statue. Eventually, yielding to pressure, Michael finally retrieved a fire extinguisher from the car and doused the flames on Judy. Several people called emergency services, reporting that they had witnessed a man setting his girlfriend on fire. Soon, paramedics and police arrived at the scene. Incredibly, Judy was still alive. She was urgently taken to the hospital, while police began investigating the circumstances. Michael called it an accident. He claimed Judy had spilled some gas on herself while refueling the car, then went to the back of the station to smoke. Supposedly, the entire fire started due to a stray spark from the cigarette. When the family received a call from Ohio State University Hospital saying Judy had been in an accident and was on life support, they weren't told over the phone what had actually happened. Mom Bonnie and sister Danielle, not understanding, rushed to the clinic and were utterly horrified by what they saw. Nothing could have prepared them for what they would see when they got to the hospital. The mother and daughter even doubted they had come to the right room. But it was Judy. If you liked the video, put a like and write your opinion, emotions, and so on in the comments after watching. Thank you. 95% of the woman's body was covered in 3rd and 4th degree burns. Her skin was charred, her hair had mostly burned off, as had her ears. Judy lost several fingers, her clothes had practically fused to her skin, and her face was completely unrecognizable. Doctors told the family that Judy's burns were the worst they had ever seen. By that time, Judy had been placed in a medically induced coma. Her chances of survival were virtually zero. The doctors didn't expect the woman to live longer than a few hours. Among physicians treating burn victims, there are mortality equations used to estimate the likelihood that a victim will die from their injuries. This calculation includes the percentage of burned body and the patient's age. According to the nurse caring for Judy, the probability of a fatal outcome in her case was 110%. Meanwhile, detectives were questioning Michael to try to extract the truth about what happened. At first, the man categorically refused to admit any guilt on his part, but investigators had already viewed the surveillance camera footage from the gas station and knew that Michael had doused Judy with gasoline. When they informed him of this, he changed his story, and it was still far from the truth. Michael said it was all an accident. He and Judy had a minor argument, and the woman splashed soda in his face. In response, he jokingly decided to douse her with gasoline. Since she ruined his clothes, he did the same to her. Then Judy wanted to smoke. He handed her a lighter, and her clothes caught fire. His words still raised doubts, and there was only one person capable of either confirming or refuting what was said. That person was Judy Malinowski herself. But at that moment, she was under the influence of sedatives and completely unresponsive, barely clinging to life. However, her answers would determine whether they could press charges against Michael. So after consulting with doctors, it was decided to bring the victim out of the coma so she could help clarify the situation. This was extremely risky, but time was of the essence. That's how much time the doctors predicted Judy had, given her condition. No one had any idea if this would work, if the woman would hear them, as her ears were severely damaged in the fire. Nevertheless, Judy was brought out of anesthesia. She indicated that she could hear the questions and was able to answer them. Detectives made suggestions, and Judy nodded yes or no. She was able to confirm that it was Michael who deliberately doused her with gasoline and then set her on fire. This interrogation on the brink of death showed how strong a person this woman was. Overcoming pain, she tried to tell the police the truth about what happened at the gas station. After this conversation, doctors continued treatment, though they knew Judy was destined to live at most a couple of hours. But hours turned into days, days into weeks, and Judy kept fighting. The specialists handling her rehabilitation were amazed she was still alive. Of course, the woman was still in terrible condition. She was wrapped from head to toe in dressings and bandages, which had to be changed twice a day, and it was excruciatingly painful. Her burned skin bled and festered. The bandages stuck, and to change them, Judy had to endure excruciating pain each time. She couldn't move, had difficulty breathing, so it was decided to put her back into an induced coma, which lasted a long 7 months. During this time, she underwent about 60 surgeries, many of which were unsuccessful. They amputated her arm because it was burned to the bone. They performed skin grafts, and once she nearly died right on the operating table. While Judy fought for her life every day, Michael was held in jail awaiting trial. He was charged with aggravated arson and assault, but Michael still denied that he did anything intentionally. In reality, he was likely sitting in his jail cell waiting, thinking Judy would never pull through and be able to testify against him. And although it sounds terrible, the detectives were essentially also waiting for Judy's death to charge Michael with her murder. While authorities worked on investigating the case, the woman lay in a coma for months, her life hanging by a thread. The lead detective on the case no longer expected to hear that Malinowski had regained consciousness and was ready to testify. He was incredibly surprised when he got a call from the hospital. This was the first case with a likely fatal outcome where the detective managed to meet and talk with the victim. Judy could only answer questions in a whisper. She knew that whether the person who maimed her would sit in prison or continue to ruin other women's lives depended on her. After seeing herself in the mirror 2 months later, Judy vowed she would find the strength and seek justice. Michael's defense team stated that if he went to trial and if Judy testified against him, in the long run, it would be much worse for Michael. The jury would immediately feel hatred and anger towards him, and if Judy died from her injuries in the future, he could be charged with her death. Michael himself and his defense team didn't want to let this happen, so he changed his not guilty plea to no contest. No trial was held, as he essentially didn't contest his guilt. He was sentenced for assault and aggravated arson, amounting to 11 years in prison. And although this was the maximum sentence for such a crime, Judy was heartbroken. All she sought was justice. The woman wanted her voice to be heard, and yet felt that Michael had once again silenced her. However, Judy didn't give up. She continued to fight while she was alive, even in such a vulnerable state. Now she was concerned not so much with justice for herself, but with a desire to protect other women from such monsters. Judy wanted to use her situation and what she had been through to help future victims who might find themselves in the same position as her. Judy Malinowski spent months lying in a hospital bed, and all this time she was promoting a campaign to change the criminal justice system. With the help of her family, this woman lobbied for the adoption of a new law that would provide for maximum punishment for intentionally maiming someone. And although Judy couldn't change the punishment for Michael, she conducted this campaign in defense of future victims, recording messages directly from the hospital. Experiencing excruciating pain inflicted by the man she fell in love with, she fought for justice for others. In January 2017, her health sharply deteriorated. Doctors and loved ones felt that Judy's strength was running out. She was tired of fighting. It was at that moment that the prosecution realized they needed to record Judy's testimony to subsequently bring a case of intentional deprivation of life. Until then, the prosecution team, like Judy, was also angered by Michael's paltry sentence. So they asked her to record testimony for a potential murder trial. This had never been done before. They had to try to make Judy's story help punish the person who ruined her life in the future. Prosecutors didn't quite understand how this would work. They had to go through all the complexities of the judicial system to ensure the legality of their actions in the future. At that time in the U.S., there were no cases where a victim of a fatal crime gave testimony in a case about their own murder. Judy's condition was worsening every day, but the amount of pain medication she was taking had to be significantly reduced to ensure clarity of mind during testimony. Nevertheless, she agreed to it. This was about Judy, who had already proven more than once that she was a fighter and capable of breaking the system. The prosecution offered Judy the chance to record her testimony on video before she passed away. These recordings were intended to be played in court during the trial regarding her death. Preparing for this challenging filming, the woman decided to combat her pain independently, completely ceasing the use of painkillers so that Michael's defense couldn't later accuse her of being incoherent. For several weeks, she trained herself to exist without pills. When Judy succeeded and her condition stabilized, she was finally ready to fully recount her tragic story. The worst part was that Michael requested to be in the same room as Judy during her testimony. He had the right to face his accuser, but fortunately, the judge deemed this an intimidation tactic, and Michael's request was denied. Instead, medical staff remained by Judy's side. Family members were also prohibited from being present in the room. Judy was connected to a video call, and right there on the hospital bed, she was sworn in. Both the prosecution and defense were to question her. It resembled standard testimony, except for the fact that Judy was lying on a hospital bed, fighting for her life and telling a story that would help her achieve justice only after her death. The fire-scarred woman gathered all her willpower and managed to recall the events of that tragic day. She remembered her thoughts at that moment. Judy was certain she was dying, so she simply prayed to Jesus to forgive her sins and look after her children. After that, she lost consciousness and only woke up in the hospital. Then Judy described what it's like to be burned alive. She wanted to make it clear that this wasn't an accident. It was done intentionally. When one of Michael's lawyers cross-examined her, he reminded Judy of her harmful addiction, how she allegedly stole her boyfriend's car, and about an accidental overdose when emergency services had to be called. The lawyer attempted to portray Judy's account as unreliable and inquired whether she had provoked Michael that day. He aimed to cast doubt on her ability to reason clearly, given the woman's poor condition. However, this was precisely why Judy endured severe pain, refusing medication throughout the cross-examination. She displayed incredible strength and courage, never wavering from her convictions. Finally, the video testimony concluded. Judy had accomplished what she had endured all this pain for, and could now rest peacefully. It took a lot of energy to go through this ordeal, which noticeably affected her well-being. No one knew how long she would survive after such strain. In June 2017, after almost 2 years of daily struggle, Judy decided to transfer to hospice care. On June 27, 2017, 696 days after the tragedy, Judy Malinowski passed away at 33 years old. Her mother Bonnie was by her side, supporting her unfortunate daughter until the end. Then, nearly a year later, in July 2018, Michael Slager finally stood trial for Judy's murder. The man planned to plead not guilty, but at the preliminary hearing after Judy's testimony was presented to the court, Michael's attorney advised him to accept a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Ultimately, Michael agreed to the deal and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. It turns out this was exactly what Judy Malinowski had requested before her death. She wanted Michael to receive life imprisonment because she felt the death penalty would be too lenient compared to what she endured in her final 2 years. Judy hoped that this person, sitting behind bars, would reflect on what he had done and realize the full weight of his guilt. After the case concluded, the family established the Judy Foundation, which provides support to victims of domestic violence and people struggling with addiction. Incredibly, the woman's efforts were not in vain. In summer 2017, Ohio passed a new law called Judy's Law, which incorporated all the changes Judy had requested. Judy's 2 daughters, then 10 and 13 years old, attended this event. The girls sat next to the state governor as he signed the bill. Addressing a room full of reporters, the younger daughter called her mom brave, while the older one added that at least mom didn't suffer in vain. Judy's law was passed by the state senate the day after her death. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.